And he says in verse 2, attending him were mighty seraphim, each having 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. They were calling out to each other, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of heaven's armies. The whole earth is filled with his glory. These seraphim, seraph, the word seraph, it's a spiritual being. The eam that you hear on there is telling us that there are multiple beings here. We don't know how many. I think as we move on in, verse 5, we get a better idea of what might be taking place in here. But eam is the plural in the Hebrew language. So it's the difference of me saying Bible and Bibles. That S that we add, that's the eam. And so Isaiah is saying there are multiple spiritual beings in the presence of God, and they are proclaiming his glory. And then the point that he makes here, he says they had 6 wings, they covered their face with 2, they covered their feet with 2, they flew with 2, and they proclaimed his glory, singing, holy, holy, holy is the Lord. Every interaction, just about, in Scripture, when a human being comes face to face, comes into presence with a spiritual being like this, it says they're terrified. And yet, those beings that terrify us so much are in the presence of God, and they're covering their faces. They're covering their eyes. And what's happening here is a beautiful illustration of what a life of worship looks like. These seraphim, they're covering their eyes in recognition of this relational aspect of God's holiness. They realize I'm in the presence of a mighty God, and I'm not worthy to look upon him. And then they cover their feet because, again, in this culture, going back to cultural context, the feet were considered to be unclean. Think about it. As you're walking, it's the feet that are tracking in dirt and mud in and out of a home, right? It's the feet that are covered with the dust. The feet in this culture were considered to be unclean. And so they would cover their feet because they're saying, not only will I not look upon you because I'm unworthy to look upon you, but I wouldn't dare defile your presence. They're recognizing that he is the Holy One, that he is perfect and sinless. But when I said earlier that there's a perfect example here of what a life of worship looks like, what I mean is this. The seraphim have 6 wings. 2 are to cover their eyes in recognition of their unworthiness and in recognition of his holiness. 2 are to cover their feet in recognition of his perfection and their lack thereof. So 4 out of the 6 wings are meant for worship. And only 2 meant for action. Only 2 for flying. In our culture, we get so tied up, so busy all the time trying to do. How can I serve? What can I do? How can I be busy? Because apparently in America, we're not busy enough. And we feel insufficient because, I'm not doing enough for God. But we see those in charge of worship, those who are in the very presence of God worshiping, they have an emphasis elsewhere. It's not about doing, it's about being. There's a position of heart here, a disposition. Paul says when he's telling Timothy what a leader in the church is supposed to be, before he says anything about here's what they have to be doing, he doesn't even go there. He barely scratches the surface on what needs to be done, and he addresses the character and what needs to be first. He says, before you can be a deacon, before you can be an elder, before you're serving and you do anything, you need to be. There's character that needs to be in place. There's a heart that needs to be in place. Jesus says the same thing on the Sermon on the Mount before he gets into what to do and what not to do, or what sin looks like inside and outside. He starts in Matthew chapter 5 with the Beatitudes. He says, here's what you need to be. Before you do, you need to be. He says, be meek. Desire peace. Be poor in spirit, recognizing, being humble, recognizing you contribute nothing. That's what poor in spirit means. You're contributing nothing to the situation. God in his grace has saved you. There's a heart condition that has to be in place.